Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, rather had gonna yeah.
Think that, we'll obviously get into some of this, but one of the big concerns that Barnes had from Selkirk is that, UPAA is whether they want to, publicly admit it or not, is pretty much an arm of PPA. And so it would be really, really valuable to have somebody that can have the exact same PB core setup, sort of independently verify some of these claims or test some of these paddles.
Mm.
So this might be a dumb surface level question as well, but what is PB core?
Yeah. So it's PB core stands for Pickleball Coefficient of Restitution, and coefficient of restitution goes way back to Isaac Newton, 1700, 1600s, and it's just at its simplest form, it's a ratio of inbound versus outbound speed. So again, you're clamping a paddle, you're shooting it with a air cannon, and the ball bounces off the paddle, and you take the ratio of inbound versus outbound. So, for example, we're hearing from USAP that they're going to cap the PB core at 0.44 this year and 0.43 next year. So that 0.43 literally means the outbound speed is 43% of what the inbound speed was. So they're shooting it at 60 miles an hour, and when it bounces off the paddle, it comes off at 43% of that speed.
Mhm.
And that's where they
Gotcha,
want to cap
gotcha.
it for the top, right?
Sure. So rather than using the old metrics of how much the face moves when you put a weight down on the paddle, they're going to be using this as a measure of exit velocity, which is hoping to be a more accurate measure of just how fast the ball comes off the paddle, essentially.
Right.
And do you feel like this is a far better metric than deflection?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, deflection's an indirect method where you're just basically testing how much weight you can press into the face and how many millimeters it flexes, right? And you can get around that. There's ways to game that system and create paddles that are way more powerful than what that system is meant to measure. I don't think the PB core is going to be the golden rule that without any kind of potential for gaming it. I think we're going to see issues, and right now they've mostly borrowed the formula from baseball. And while there are a lot of parallels with it's still a stick and ball game, pickleball is. But while there are a lot of parallels with baseball, I think that there are going to be some unique aspects of a pickleball paddle and a pickleball that we'll have to tweak the formula of PB core to make sure that it's as objective and this tool that really is the best tool to measure exit velocity on a paddle.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there'll be plenty of holes poked in some of this over the years to come. Yeah, I'm sure we'll have to adapt just like we have for forever. It's there. We're not close to this being a solved sport, and so I think there'll be plenty more holes to fill on this. But I think it is a good start. Like we're getting closer to measuring the actual variable that we want to manage. There's no way that PPA UPA is going back to the USAP certification. I don't think it works with their business, and I think that bridge has more or less been burned. And I do think that UPA, or I'm sorry, USAP shot themselves in the foot by a couple years of what I think probably weren't great responses to paddle developments and paddle just overall issues. So I didn't realize that PB Core was on USAP's radar until after some of the conversations about exit velocity that I had been personally having with UPA-A employees or officials or whatever you want to call them. So
Mhm.
you mentioning that USAP is on that same uh, like trajectory is interesting and news to me.
Mm. Yeah, and they've actually already approved a couple of paddles with the PB core stamp. So um, we can get into this in a minute, but they came out with a sunsetting news saying that some paddles are not passing the PB core upper limit, the ceiling, so they will be sunset in, I think it's July 1st of 2025, meaning they're too
Mhm,
powerful. And on that list were the Yola Mod TA15s and the Gearbox Pro Power elongated. So
mhm.
both of those paddles are extremely powerful. Now, Gearbox and Yola both have known about this, but here's the new replacement for the the Pro Power
Interesting.
elongated, and this is the Pro Ultimate elongated. And I think you can see, yeah. So
Yeah. Okay. So we have two USAP stamps on there as well as PB Core approved. For those of
right.
you guys who are just listening to this, there are now two of those little USAP stamps on there.
That one
John,
is
are
a
you able to read the difference between the two of those?
Yeah, so one is a standard USAP stamp and the other is quiet approved. So
Oh, interesting.
this paddle is not as quiet as the owl or or the diadem hush, but it is a quieter paddle. And then prevalently on top of those two stamps is the PB core stamp. So it's they are already down that road, and they have the capacity and the engineers to test PB core. So as far as I know, this was the first this Gearbox Pro Ultimate Power, and this is a little more muted than their Pro Power Elongated, which was Sunset. But I'd say that it's around the same power level as like the Paddletech Bantam series.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So anyway, before I cut you off, I think we were talking about the interim certification
Mhm.
of paddles, which raised a ton of stink, and that was one of the issues in Selkirk's initial letter, and I think probably what set off this entire bad blood between Selkirk and UPAA was the
Mhm.
fact that Yola was some of these Yola paddles were interim approved right as this interim approval process was basically publicly announced. So I think the interim approval process was publicly announced, and within the week, Yola had produced paddles and that were stamped with this interim approval of UPAA, which means they're absolutely 100% had to have been previous communication between UPAA and Yola because it takes several weeks to be able to create paddles and stamp them and all that stuff. So there clearly was some sort of early communication there between Yola and Selkirk, between Yola and UPAA, which is I think probably what caused a good chunk of this animosity there.
Sure. Yeah, and there's even more history to that also with Yola and USAP. So the Gen 3 paddles, that massive launch, probably the biggest paddle launch in history.
Mhm.
USAP, a week after it was launched, delisted those because they were too powerful, and then that resulted in a big lawsuit, and Yola, having to allow everybody to send back the paddles for a refund. And this lawsuit's still ongoing. But then, I think Selkirk felt like, well, UPAA just opened the door for the same paddles to be um, relisted in a different organization. Now, to be fair, the ones that were approved by UPAA, which were the Yola 3Ss, are not the same as the Gen 3s that were delisted. They're less powerful. They're still power paddles, but they, again, I'd put them around the Paddletech Bantam level. They're not the crazy power that you saw with the Gen 3s. Or, by the way, the Mod TA-15, which is exactly the same as the Gen 3s that
Right.
were delisted. So
Right. So the
kind of
three
a
paddles
morass.
we're talking about here are the Gen 3, which was part of the huge launch, and then that was pretty quickly delisted by USAP. So Yola created the Mod TA, which is essentially the same thing, but with the white edge guard, which then passed. The Mod TA did not pass the UPAA rules, correct? So they had
Correct.
to dumb down the power a little bit to create the 3S.
Mhm.
So the
Right.
3S, you're saying, is actually slightly less powerful than the Gen 3 or the Mod TA,
For sure.
which I think sounds like I have heard that kind of across the board.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, rather had fun,